I'm 26, female, and for most of my life, I was the quiet one at family events. Not mysterious quiet, just the one people forgot to ask about. At every birthday, wedding, or dinner, I'd end up sitting near the food, half listening to conversations that didn't include me. My cousins were always the center of attention, loud, flashy, perfect hair and makeup, trendy outfits, inside jokes flying back and forth. I was the background blur in every photo. I remember being 13 and standing awkwardly next to the dessert table at my uncle's anniversary party. My aunt, the one who never filtered her words, looked at me, then turned to my mom and said, "It's like she didn't come with a personality installed." Everyone laughed. My mom tried to chuckle, but I saw the look she gave me after. Embarrassed. Not for my aunt, for me. That kind of thing happened a lot. I wasn't invited to Cousin Ria's Sweet 16 or Mega's graduation dinner. When my mom found out, she'd make a big deal, call someone up, guilt trip them into adding me last minute. I hated that even more. I always knew when I was a pity guest, the kind where the hostess gives you a half smile and a seat at the edge of the table. By the time I was in college, I'd started skipping family functions altogether. There was no fight, no drama, just silence. Until my final semester, when I accidentally overheard my cousin Priya talking to someone outside our campus cafe. She didn't see me. I was walking past when I heard her say, we'd invite her to the bachelorette, but she'd ruin the vibe. That was it. No more chasing closeness that wasn't real. I didn't go to her wedding. I didn't send a message. I removed myself from every group chat, except the one with my parents. I went full no contact with everyone else. For a while, I didn't know who I was without all that quiet resentment sitting in my chest. But that space, it gave me time to build. I started going to the gym. At first, it was just walking on the treadmill in the corner, then weights, then classes. I got stronger, sharper. My body changed, yes, but so did my posture. I started walking into rooms differently. Around the same time, I found a therapist through my university. I only meant to go for a few sessions, but we ended up working together for a year. We dug through the guilt, the self-doubt, the idea that I had to earn love by changing myself. And eventually, I did change, but for me this time. I got a job right after graduating, not a flashy one, but one where I had a desk, a team, and clients who listened when I spoke. It was a small boutique consulting firm, but the culture was solid and I got to work on things that mattered. I joined a local Toastmasters chapter, volunteered at a youth center, bought clothes that actually fit well. For the first time, I looked in the mirror and didn't wince. I even dyed my hair deep red just because I'd always wanted to. 2 years passed like that. Quiet, but not lonely. No contact with my cousins. Just the occasional happy birthday text from someone I barely recognized. And then last week, I got added to a group chat out of nowhere. Someone must have re-added my number without realizing I'd left before. It was my cousin Sarah. She was planning a big family reunion at some countryside estate she rented. Fancy place, weekend-long retreat, spa and all. Her message said, "Everyone's invited. Dress code, bold, beautiful, and confident only." At first, I laughed. Then I paused. Was it a joke? A jab? Or both? I asked, "Is the invite open to everyone, really?" Priya replied with a message that took her less than a minute to type but years to make me expect. "As long as you've learned to have fun." I didn't argue. I didn't try to read into it. I just responded, "Sure, I'll be there." I didn't say anything else. I didn't send an outfit photo. I didn't ask who else was going. I just circled the date and quietly made arrangements. I'd drive there myself. I'd stay the whole weekend. I'd show up as the version of me they never bothered to get to know. The one who doesn't wait for someone to pull out a chair for her anymore. The one who walks in, owns her space, and doesn't ask permission to take up room. They wanted bold, beautiful, and confident. They were about to get it. I pulled up to the estate alone, just as the sun was starting to set behind the hills. The place was even fancier than I expected. Stone walls, sprawling lawns, and a driveway long enough to make an entrance. I had rented a sleek black coupe for the weekend. Not because I needed it, but because I knew every part of this weekend was going to be watched, judged, whispered about. Might as well set the tone before I even opened the door. When I stepped out, the first person I locked eyes with was Niehe. She was standing near the welcome drinks, wearing the usual crop top and matching skirt combo she'd worn since college. She did a double take. I could see her trying to place me. I was in a fitted navy jumpsuit, block heels, oversized sunglasses, hairstyled and carrying nothing but a small clutch. No hoodie, no backpack, no awkward posture to give me away. I walked up the path like I'd been here 1,000 times. My Uncle Raj caught sight of me and blurted out, "Whoa, you look like one of those TikTok entrepreneurs now." He meant it as a compliment, I think, but said it with the same confused face someone makes when a cat starts using the toilet. The rest of the cousins started appearing one by one, and suddenly I wasn't invisible. Ria whispered something to Mega. Mega looked me up and down, then gave me a wide smile that didn't touch her eyes. People who had ignored me for years were now complimenting my hair, my weight loss, my vibe. Someone actually used the word boss energy. I kept my responses short and polite. "Thank you. Appreciate it. That's kind of you." I sipped sparkling water and watched the same people who once pretended I wasn't there try to laugh at all the right times and hang on every word I said. Priya came last. She walked toward me slowly, holding her wine glass like a prop. Her hug was stiff, and when she pulled back, she said, "Wow, all glammed up, huh?" I looked her in the eye and said, "Didn't expect to be welcomed," then turned and walked toward the food table. She was still mid-laugh when I left her standing there. At dinner, the seating arrangement was clearly planned by someone who didn't expect me to matter. I was at the far end, near the kids' table, but my side of the room ended up louder than the rest. I told a story from work about a last-minute pitch gone wrong, a client presentation with the wrong slides, and how my team turned it around in under an hour. It ended with the client giving us a standing ovation. I told it like it was just another Tuesday, and people at my table couldn't stop laughing. Ed started turning. Even the cool table paused a few times to glance our way. For the first time in years, I wasn't being ignored, I was being watched, and they didn't know what to do with it. That night, I was in my room scrolling through my phone when I heard a knock. It was Simran, my youngest cousin. She looked nervous. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me that when she was younger, she always thought I was cool, that she used to wait to see what I was wearing because I dressed different from the others. But everyone around her made fun of me for it, so she never said anything. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she secretly took of my outfit earlier. She had already sent it to her friends with the caption "Aesthetic Inspo." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. The next morning, there was a yoga session on the lawn. It was supposed to be chill, but once Priya noticed people watching us, it turned into a performance. She started showing off complicated poses. I matched every one of them, calm and steady. Then she tried one move too far and pulled something in her back. She winced and sat down hard on her mat. I walked over and handed her a heat patch from my bag. She looked surprised. I didn't say anything. I just didn't want to give anyone a reason to say I was being spiteful. By lunch, the awkward tension was back. Everyone had seen the yoga scene. The silence was thick until someone brought up work. It spiraled into a humble brag contest about offices, promotions, and remote schedules. When it got to me, I mentioned casually that I had just wrapped up leading a 6-month project that got picked up by a Fortune 500 company. No flex, just facts. The table went quiet. Even the aunties who normally interrupted everything paused. I saw Priya stir her iced tea without speaking. Mega blinked and changed the topic to wedding venues. They didn't know where to place me anymore. I wasn't the awkward cousin, the afterthought. I wasn't loud or attention-seeking either. I was something else now, someone they couldn't control, categorize, or ignore. And the weekend had barely started. By the time the second day rolled around, the polite smiles had started slipping. What began as curious stares and awkward compliments was now turning into something else: tighter jaws, louder interruptions, forced laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. The morning started with brunch out on the terrace. Everyone was dressed in soft pastels and summer linen, clinking glasses over French toast and fruit bowls. I took a seat near the edge, away from the main crowd. Simran came over and sat next to me, and a few others followed. I was mid-sentence explaining a funny work story when Priya cut in from 3 seats down with a loud, "That's nice. But you know what's actually crazy, Bai?" She steamrolled the whole conversation. I stopped talking. The others shifted uncomfortably. One cousin looked at her, then looked at me, and just started eating quietly. A few minutes later, I felt something wet hit my side. I looked down and saw mimosa soaking into the corner of my bag. A cousin I hadn't spoken to all weekend stared at her glass and muttered, "Oh no," but made no move to help. Simran immediately grabbed napkins from another table and helped me dab it off, apologizing even though she hadn't done anything. The others just kept chatting like nothing happened. I excused myself and moved to a smaller table across the patio. 5 minutes later, 3 people followed me and casually sat down like it was their idea. I didn't say anything. I just noted it. So did Simran, who gave me a tiny smirk across the table. While replying to an email on my phone, I noticed someone behind me, one of Priya's friends, leaning just a little too close. When I tilted my screen away, she immediately looked off like she'd been staring at the plants. I locked my phone and put it away. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to take a call and passed 2 cousins sitting on a swing bench. One of them muttered she's totally on a revenge tour. It just came to flex, disappear again after this weekend. I kept walking, but the final push came when I accidentally caught Priya talking on the phone near the driveway. She didn't see me standing on the other side of the hedge. Her voice was clear. She's pretending she belongs now, but give it a year. She'll fade again. That night, I had planned to host a casual game night. I put up a sign-up list in the group chat earlier that morning, brought a stack of card games and snacks, and sat up in the lounge after dinner. 5 minutes before we started, Priya walked in wearing a sparkly dress and announced a surprise performance, a dance number she just threw together with a few of the other girls. It split the group in half. Some drifted toward the living room where she was setting up speakers, but more stayed in the lounge with me. Not because I asked them to, they just chose to. The games ended up being a hit. 2 older aunts even joined in and stayed through 2 full rounds of who's most likely to. At one point, one of them laughed and said, "You've really changed." In a good way. Someone else added, "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Afterward, I got a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. All it said was, "I like this version of you. You're different, but it's a good different." The next morning, I went to put on my sandals and found they were gone from the entryway. I checked the hall, then the dining room, then outside the patio door. I found them 20 minutes later, hidden under a bush at the edge of the garden, soaking wet from the sprinklers. I didn't say anything. I wiped them off, left them in the sun, and wore my backup flats to breakfast. That morning I was louder. Not in a forced way. I just stopped shrinking. I spoke freely, laughed harder, asked questions, shared jokes, and people responded. There wasn't a circle anymore. It had become a web, and I was in the middle of it without even trying. Later that afternoon, a few of the younger cousins came up to me and asked if I could give them advice about careers. They were finishing university or job hunting and said they didn't feel comfortable asking the others. We sat on the back porch and talked through everything: resumes, interview tips, how to answer behavioral questions. They took notes. One even asked to email me later for help prepping for a final round. That used to be Priya's thing. Every year, she'd host a mentor lunch for the younger girls. This time, no one mentioned it. No one brought it up. It just didn't happen. And now they were sitting with me instead. Not because I pushed for it. Not because I asked. Just because I showed up and didn't disappear. By dinner, people weren't just including me. They were gravitating toward me. And from across the table, Priya watched it happen, without saying a word. The morning started with that strange kind of quiet that's not really about noise. The air was fine, but the energy had shifted. People got quiet as I entered the kitchen. A few eyes lifted from their phones and went right back down. Simran was already seated, sipping tea, and gave me a small nod. That was the only real acknowledgement I got before I grabbed a plate and took a seat near the window. Throughout breakfast, I noticed it. Cousins glancing at their phones, then at me, then back to their plates with these little smirks like they were in on something. It wasn't just one or two, it was almost all of them. Someone scrolled a bit too slowly beside me, and I caught the edge of an old photo flash on the screen. After we cleared the dishes, Simran pulled me aside near the hallway and showed me her phone. It was a screenshot from a side group chat I wasn't part of. In the chat, someone had posted a photo of me from our high school yearbook. Glasses, frizzy hair, awkward smile, with the caption, "Glow-ups are cool, but the core stays the same, lol." Apparently Priya had sent it in the chat the night before, then added a few snide comments about how I was still trying too hard and dressing up like confidence was a costume. No one in the thread defended me. A couple laughed reacted. I didn't say anything to Simran. I just nodded. She stayed quiet too, but didn't leave my side for the rest of the morning. Next event was a group walk down to the small lake on the edge of the property. I switched into a new outfit, crisp white shirt tucked into wide-leg tan pants, gold hoops, light makeup, and walked down like nothing had happened. I greeted a few people casually, helped carry a drink tray, and laughed with one of the kids who was trying to balance a juice box on his head. The tension in the group was visible. Just me existing, unfazed, seemed to unnerve them more than anything I could have said. Midday, I peeled away from the group for a solo walk through the orchard behind the estate. That's where I ran into Uncle Ravi, one of the quieter, more reserved elders in our family. He was sorting some trivia cards under the gazebo and waved me over. Turns out he had volunteered to run the evening's trivia night but needed help organizing it. I offered to co-host. We worked on categories and scoring sheets for about an hour. While we wrote down answers, he looked at me and said, "You know, you're more put together than half the men I've worked with," then laughed like he couldn't believe he'd said it out loud. It wasn't meant as a big deal, but it was the first genuine praise I'd heard all weekend. That evening, trivia night started after dinner in the main lounge. I opened with a joke, walked everyone through the rules, and kicked off the first round. It ran smooth until Priya started jumping in with unrelated stories and random facts after each question, loudly, on purpose. I didn't react, just smiled, waited for her to finish, and said, "Okay, back to question 4, each time." I kept the room light and focused. A few people chuckled at how calmly I kept redirecting things, and I noticed more and more eyes turning away from Priya and toward me instead. During round 3, one of the cousins gave obviously fake answers on purpose, hoping to derail things. I played into it, exaggerated the response, and spun it into a joke that got the whole room laughing. It became part of the fun. Every time someone tried to poke holes, the energy only bounced back stronger. After the game ended, people lingered. A few started asking if I'd host something again the next night. That's when an aunt I had barely spoken to in years walked over and handed me her business card. She said she'd never seen me speak like that before, and asked if I'd ever thought about doing media work, said I had the kind of presence that draws attention. Priya, standing close, didn't miss a beat. She raised her voice and said, "You know, not everything has to be a networking opportunity," with a forced laugh. The comment hung awkwardly in the air. I turned to her, smiled, and said, "But it's nice when they happen naturally, right?" A few chuckles broke out. No one defended her. That night, I came back to my room to find a bottle of water taped with a sticky note. Just 3 words, "Still not one of us." I didn't flinch. I peeled the note off, tore it into 4 neat pieces, dropped them in the bin, and brushed my teeth like it was any other night. This wasn't about who I used to be. This wasn't even about jealousy. This was about control, and I'd already learned how to live without their approval. They couldn't make me invisible anymore, and they were running out of ways to handle that. Day 4 opened with yelling from upstairs, doors slamming, someone crying, the kind of chaos that makes people put their spoons down mid-bite. I walked out of the kitchen just as a crowd started forming near the staircase. Sarah, the cousin who had organized the whole reunion, was standing at the top holding a soggy makeup bag and a dripping towel. Her eyes were red, and her voice cracked as she said someone had dumped her entire kit into the toilet. People gasped. A few whispered. Then came the questions. Who was up there last night? Who had beef with Sarah? Who even knew which room she was in? That's when a cousin muttered something about how I wasn't invited to the room hangout the night before. Another chimed in about how I left early and didn't talk much after dinner. The suggestion was quiet, but it spread quickly. Maybe I did it out of jealousy. Maybe I was mad at being left out again. Sarah didn't say my name, but when everyone was waiting for her reaction, she looked directly at me. I stood there and said, "I've barely left the common areas this whole trip." I didn't even know she was staying upstairs. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One cousin tried to speak up for me, but someone else cut her off, accusing her of trying to stir things. I shrugged and told Sarah, "If you need help cleaning it, I don't mind." She didn't answer at first, just blinked, then shook her head and walked away with her wet bag. She knew it wasn't me. She just didn't want to admit it out loud. The energy stayed weird the rest of the morning. People talked in tight circles. Laughter felt forced. But the schedule was still packed, so the next activity moved forward, a cooking class in the estate's demo kitchen. The instructor paired us off randomly. I ended up with Priya. Within 10 minutes, she'd accidentally knocked a bottle of olive oil stirring. It splashed down my right leg, soaking my jeans. She apologized, too quickly, then moved on like nothing had happened. I excused myself, went to my room, changed into a black midi dress, and returned to the kitchen smiling like the oil incident never happened. I even joked with the instructor about needing a food hazard warning sign. The people at my table laughed. While we were plating our dishes, one of the quieter cousins leaned in and asked if I was okay. She said she overheard Priya whispering about how she was going to ruin that cool girl act before the trip ended. I thanked her without making a scene. Dinner that night was held in the garden under string lights. Long tables, soft music, everyone pretending the day hadn't been chaotic. Midway through the meal, Priya stood up holding a glass of wine. She raised it and toasted to the people who always stayed real, no matter how much others pretended to change. Some people laughed. A few glanced at me. I raised my own glass, met her gaze, and said, to the ones who had to change because being ignored wasn't an option anymore. The clinking stopped. The table went silent, then came a few slow claps. Arias. Simran, sitting at the far end, mouthed holy crap with her eyes wide. Later that night, I hosted a fireside chat. Nothing formal, just drinks, chairs around the outdoor fire pit, and stories. I brought out marshmallows, asked a few icebreaker questions, and let it flow naturally. At first it was 5 people, then 10, then nearly everyone. The circle kept expanding. People who hadn't said a word to me in years were laughing at my stories, asking follow-ups, sharing their own. Someone said, "Can you organize the next one?" This is the first time it's felt like everyone got to be part of it. Another nodded and said, "This year actually feels balanced." Priya stayed back near the patio. Afadna. She didn't sit down. She didn't join. After about 30 minutes of watching from the shadows, she disappeared inside. Someone later mentioned she said she had a migraine and left early. When the last few guests left the fire to go to bed, Simran stayed behind to help me clean up. As we folded blankets and gathered glasses, she whispered, "I hope you know, this isn't about them anymore. You changed everything." She was right. They had never expected me to become someone. They just expected me to stay forgotten. But instead, I'd become someone I would have admired at that very same reunion, just a few years earlier. And that version wasn't going anywhere. The final full day began with a shift in tone. People weren't just cold, they were calculated. At first it was quiet, cousins huddled in corners, talking low, glancing up when I passed. Then Simran gave me a heads up near the juice bar. Someone had apparently been looking into my job. There were whispers about whether I had made it sound more impressive than it was. Brunch that day was a buffet set up under the garden tent. Plates clinked. Conversations overlapped. I sat at a table near the center with Simran and 2 younger cousins. That's when Priya casually slid into the seat across from me. Without even looking up from her croissant, she dropped the line, "You know, these days anyone can just call themselves a consultant. It's such a vague title." Someone else added, "Yeah, I always wondered what that actually means." I set down my fork. Then, calmly, I gave a clear breakdown of what I do: project management, brand alignment, corporate storytelling. I listed 2 major public campaigns I'd worked on, both of which were verifiable with a simple search. Then I pulled up my company's LinkedIn profile on my phone and passed it around. The page showed my name, title, and our executive team. Right there at the top was my boss, a former brand strategist for a luxury fashion house known worldwide. A few jaws actually dropped. One uncle leaned over, read the profile, and said, "Sheesh, that's more legit than half the resumes I get at my office." Another cousin quietly said, "Well damn," before taking a long sip of coffee. Priya didn't reply. She looked down, pretending to butter a second piece of toast she hadn't even touched. An hour later, Priya's younger brother found me near the BC court. He walked up, stuffed his hands in his hoodie, and said he was sorry for how Priya had treated me. Apparently they had argued the night before. He said she was spiraling because she thought she'd lost control of the room. I didn't comment. I just nodded and told him I appreciated it. Meanwhile, Simran told me she overheard a few cousins flipping through their phones and trying to dig up old stories, school events, awkward childhood photos, anything they could use to remind people that I was still the weird one underneath. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't worried either. I knew what they were looking for didn't exist anymore. Or if it did, it had no power now. Dinner that night was the farewell dinner. Everyone dressed up. There were candles, long speeches, a slideshow someone had thrown together with photos from the weekend. Plates were full, wine was flowing, the energy finally relaxed until Priya stood up mid-meal, holding her glass. She cleared her throat and started telling a story about back when I used to wear mismatched shoes in middle school. The details were off. The timeline didn't make sense. She stumbled halfway through, then tried to recover by adding a side comment about how some things never really change. Before I could respond, her own sister jumped in and corrected her, loudly, said the story was actually about someone else. A few people laughed. Priya tried to laugh too, but it came out tight. Then one of the older aunts spoke up from the other end of the table. "What matters is who people become, not who they were at 13. It landed heavy. A few heads nodded. Then someone added, "Honestly, watching her this weekend has been a highlight." And just like that, it snowballed. Another person toasted to growth. Someone else said they hoped I'd come to every reunion from now on. One of the older uncles said he wished his own daughter would take a page out of my book. And then someone raised their glass and said, to her, for handling everything with grace, even when it wasn't easy. The whole table joined in. Even Sarah, who had stayed mostly neutral the entire week, stood up and gave me a hug. She whispered, "This wouldn't have been half as fun without you." Across the table, Priya froze. She smiled, but her teeth were clenched. Her hand gripped the base of her glass like it was holding her steady. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the evening. After dessert, I slipped away and walked to the edge of the estate. The lanterns lining the path glowed softly. I circled past the gazebo, down the hill, and stopped by the fire pit where everything had started shifting just the night before. The logs were cold now, but the chairs were still arranged in a circle. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just tolerated anymore. I wasn't background noise or someone's pity invite. I was part of the story now, a central character. Someone who had changed the rhythm of the whole weekend just by refusing to shrink back down. They used to forget I was even there. Now they couldn't figure out how to go forward without me. The morning of checkout came with a light fog settled over the estate grounds, making the stone paths and manicured hedges look almost surreal. It was quiet in a way that hadn't existed all week. No passive-aggressive comments floating between coffee cups, no dramatic whispers near the staircases, but just the low hum of rolling suitcases and trunks being shut. I sat on the upstairs balcony with a cup of black coffee, wrapped in a soft cardigan, watching everyone load their bags into cars. Most people were still in their pajamas, hair tied back, faces softer now that the performances were over. One by one, cousins started drifting over to say goodbye. Some were warm, others a little awkward, but no one ignored me. Simran came up last and sat beside me, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She stayed longer than the rest, watching the gravel driveway as cars pulled away one by one. She said this was the first reunion where she hadn't just played along, pretending to like everything Priya liked, agree with everything the older cousin said. She told me she had always felt stuck in a version of herself that Priya had molded, and seeing me, just being myself without trying to win anyone over, made her think maybe she could break out of hers too. That moment landed harder than anything else that week. No one had to clap. No one had to toast. Just that sentence, quietly said on a foggy morning, felt like proof that the work I'd done on myself had started echoing outside of me. A little later, Sarah walked by, clipboard in hand, managing the checkout process like a wedding coordinator. She smiled and asked if I'd consider helping plan the next reunion. Everyone seems to think you're the reason this one actually worked, she said. I told her I'd think about it, but only if the next one wasn't themed around exclusivity, confidence, or beautiful people, only filters. I wanted real people, messy ones who weren't trying to win a silent popularity contest. She laughed and said, fair. Final brunch was served in the garden, with folding tables set under trees and breakfast platters on every end. It felt softer than the first brunch, no one jostling for attention, no one trying to make grand speeches, just people actually talking. Real conversations. Priya was already seated when I walked over to grab tea. She gave me a look I couldn't fully read, somewhere between tired and holding on. No words, just a pause too long to be casual. A few minutes later, when I got up to refill my cup, she followed me to the side table. As I reached for the teapot, she stood beside me and asked, "Do you feel better now that you've won?" I didn't look at her. I poured my tea slowly and said, "It was never about winning. I just stopped playing a game I was never invited into. That part's on you." She stayed quiet, then nodded once. Fair, and walked away. She didn't try to spin it. Didn't follow up with a fake hug or a backhanded compliment. That silence felt more like closure than anything she could have said with a smile. I finished my tea, said goodbye to the few people still lingering, and rolled my suitcase to the car without ceremony. The drive back was easy. I didn't go over old conversations or rehearse imaginary comebacks. I didn't wonder what people were saying about me in the cars behind. I just played music, cracked the windows, and let the quiet feel earned. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, cream-colored envelope with a pressed flower inside. It was from Sarah. She thanked me for being part of the reunion, for showing up fully, for not holding grudges or making scenes. She said she hoped we'd stay in touch more, that we'd actually build something as adults, not just cousins. I messaged her back and said I'd love that. A month later, I visited her office for a small business mixer she was hosting. When she introduced me to a few of her colleagues, she didn't say this is my cousin. She said, "This is the woman who changed the temperature in a room by just being herself." They'd once said I wouldn't be invited unless I changed. So I changed. But the joke was on them, because I didn't change to be invited. I changed so I'd never need the invitation again.